Miriam pressed her foot against the brake pedal, peering through the windshield at the winding path ahead. She had not planned on driving this route so late at night, but an urgent personal errand had forced her to take the old road through the looming forest. Locals called it the Forgotten Road, a stretch of cracked asphalt that cut through dense, ancient trees whose gnarled branches twisted together high above, forming an almost cathedral-like canopy. Slivers of moonlight pierced through the leaves, but the dim silver beams only illuminated pockets of swirling fog along the edges of the pavement. The oppressive silence gave the impression that once one entered this narrow path, it would swallow all traces of reality, until there was nothing left but darkness. She drove slowly, uneasy about the stories she had heard. Despite her skeptical nature, Miriam couldn't shake the feeling that something out here was watching. Rumors had long circulated that a carriage driver, headless and furious in his eternal servitude, roamed this lonely road in search of unsuspecting travelers to claim his passengers. Some said he was a black-cloaked silhouette, perched upon a looming carriage. Others claimed his steed had eyes like embers, leading him through the forest even without a driver's head to guide it. On quieter nights, villagers whispered. You could hear the rhythmic clatter of spectral hooves and the scrape of rusted wheels echoing among the trunks. Miriam had never believed the tales, though she sensed a creeping dread even as she repeatedly reminded herself there was no such thing as a headless spirit commanding a carriage in the dead of night. She cranked down the window to let in some fresh air, hoping to dispel the closeness that came with the stifling, cramped conditions of the forest road. But the moment she did, a gust of cold, wet wind rushed into the car. It smelled faintly of wet leaves, and something more pungent, maybe rotted wood or damp earth that had been undisturbed for too long. The hair on her arm stood up. Immediately, she shut the window again, feeling oddly vulnerable. Ahead, the trees thickened, their trunks pressing in close until there was barely enough elbow room on either side of the road. The asphalt turned ragged, pitted with ancient cracks, as if the land beneath it were trying to reclaim what was once a mere footpath. In these suffocating woods, the days of modern convenience felt centuries away. Miriam found it all too easy to imagine horse-drawn carts trudging along this road. Winding around battered stumps and hidden gullies, she pictured travelers in tall hats and heavy cloaks braving the gloom. They too must have felt the same chill in their bones. The lore said that in the old days, one driver in particular made his living ferrying doomed souls from one village to another each night. He was rumored to be reckless yet tireless, riding with a demonic vigor. Some nights, a passenger would vanish, never to be heard from again, until the townsfolk discovered the driver's severed head buried in a nearby ditch, his final passenger nowhere to be found. Ever since, the decapitated specter roamed the road, hunting for new fares. The inexplicable notion of that restless spirit made Miriam shiver. She tried to distract herself by fiddling with the radio, but only static hissed through the speakers. The deeper she went, the more the station signals faded. She gave up and shut it off. The final notes of mechanical fuzz died away, leaving her in near total silence. The engine's hum seemed oddly muted here, as if the forest had a way of swallowing up all sound. The swirling mist thickened, rising in wraith-like tendrils from the forest floor. Her headlights cut through the haze, revealing a jagged shape protruding from the side of the road. It looked at first to be a large stump, but as she slowed, she realized it was a broken roadside shrine. A small granite pedestal bore faint carvings she couldn't identify. A sense of sorrow clung to it, as though it had once been a site of earnest prayers. Now, it sat abandoned, an ominous landmark in the gloom. She cleared her throat, too aware of how loud her breathing suddenly sounded in the stillness. It's just a story, she muttered to herself. Yet the further she traveled, the more details from old superstitions sprang unbidden to her mind. A local had once whispered to her that if you heard the sound of horse hooves approaching from behind while traveling the forgotten road, never look back. The headless driver chose those who turned to face him, enticing them into his carriage. She caught herself darting quick glances at the rearview mirror. Of course, she saw nothing but the swirling haze behind her bumper and the faint outline of the forest. Still, she couldn't help checking again. Then, a strange noise emerged in the distance. A rhythmic clip-clop, clip-clop. Initially, it was so faint Miriam thought her mind was playing tricks on her, producing illusions out of fear. But the sound grew louder, more distinct. Each set of hooves beating in perfect time with the next. From time to time, she reassured herself it could be an echo of her own car's tires, or perhaps a lost horse out for a midnight trot. Yet a chill of recognition slid over her. She pressed her lips together, trying to quell the uneasiness that threatened to form a knot in her stomach. She had no horse behind her, and certainly no reason to hear that eerie gallop. She eased on the accelerator, urging the car forward faster, the engine sputtering slightly in response. The trees swooned alongside her, trailing glimmers of ghostly light that seemed to revolve in the periphery of her vision. The sound drew nearer, closer than she dared to believe. She was too scared to look in the mirror again, certain she'd see something that would confirm her darkest suspicions. Her mind raced with the legend. The headless driver hunts for new passengers lost on this road, thirsting for a chance to lure them into his cursed carriage. Once you step inside, they say, your soul joins the driver's eternal hunt, never to escape. Feeling her heart pound against her ribs, Miriam forced her gaze firmly ahead, gripping the steering wheel in a way that hurt her fingers. She refused to succumb to some childish fear, refused to validate a myth. She wouldn't look behind her. Then she saw lights, two faint lamps bobbing in the darkness just to her left as the road curved. It took several seconds for her brain to piece together what she was seeing. They were not headlights. They had the soft, wavering glimmer of lanterns hanging from a carriage. Miriam slowed. She gasped as a black carriage, half broken, with tall, spindly wheels and a tattered canopy, rolled into view from a side path that she had never known existed. The coach wheels creaked in a tortured symphony, echoing in the unnatural hush. The driver's seat was empty, or rather, the figure sitting there had no head. The rest of him was unmistakable. A body draped in ragged black cloth, hands gripping the carriage's reins. Atop the horse's harness, two crimson, burning eyes glared like dying coals. Miriam panicked. She pressed down on the gas, surging ahead, trembling in a mixture of disbelief and horror. She caught a fleeting glimpse of the decaying horse, flaring its nostrils and stepping heavily onto the road behind her. The driver's cloak fluttered in the stale wind of his own creation, shoulders shifting as though scanning for prey. If there was any doubt in her mind as to whether she had imagined the entire thing, it vanished the moment she heard a shrill neigh behind her car, followed by the rattling of carriage wheels in rapid pursuit. She sped up, ignoring the potholes, leaning so hard on the accelerator that she feared she might veer off the narrow asphalt. But the carriage's wheels hammered the ground relentlessly, seemingly unaffected by the uneven terrain. Branches scraped the top of her car, leaves whipped across the windshield. The sound was deafening, everything around her culminating in a nerve-wracking cacophony of shifting branches, her rattling engine, and the thunderous hoofbeats behind her. Terror threatened to seize the base of her neck, stiffening her shoulders as adrenaline coursed through her veins. Her reflection in the rearview mirror was wide-eyed, sweaty, breathing in short, unintelligible gasps. In a frantic motion, she flicked on her high beams, hoping to see more than the fleeting glimpses of the road. The harsh light cut through the mist, revealing coastline-like edges of weed-choked ditches that threatened to drop off on either side. She had to fight the urge to swerve to avoid a large branch in the middle of the road. The carriage, if she dared to call it that, loomed ever closer each time she sneaked a look in the mirror. There was no driver's face peering at her, of course, just the silhouette of that headless shape in the seat. She swore she could see an unnerving glint of moonlight reflecting off something clasped in the occupant's left hand. Something suspiciously shaped like an axe, or perhaps a blade. The cloak rippled as it guided the horse onward. She imagined the echo of that invisible face shrieking with triumphant glee. Her eyes burned with tears of fear. She told herself she had only a few more miles until she escaped this tangled nightmare of a forest. At the speed she was going, in mere minutes the road would lead her out. She prayed that the local mythology was correct about the headless driver's domain being confined to the forgotten road. If she could just cross the boundary of the forest, maybe the ghostly driver would vanish back into legend. The minutes stretched into an eternity. The stallion's breath roared behind her like a furnace. She could hear the grotesque panting along with a constant whine of wood on wood, as if the carriage itself bemoaned its forced eternal journey. Suddenly, her headlights illuminated something blocking the road, another large obstacle. She only had a split second to react. Miriam yanked the wheel hard to the left, the tires screeching in protest. Through the rattling of her car, she braced for impact. She felt a jolt as she clipped the corner of a fallen tree trunk, the car veering dangerously close to the ditch. Her seatbelt dug into her collarbone as she fought to straighten the steering wheel. In her peripheral vision, she saw the carriage's twisted silhouette gliding effortlessly around the trunk as if guided by a malevolent intelligence, unbothered by physical barriers. The road twisted, climbed upward along a small ridge. She pressed on, pushing her engine to its limits, her heart hammering so hard that she thought it might burst. Then, abruptly, the thunder of hooves seemed to vanish. Miriam jerked her head around in reflex before recalling the warning. Never look back. She forced her gaze forward again, but the hush behind her now felt even more uncanny. Instead of feeling relief, dread snaked its way further into her thoughts. The road curved around, narrower and narrower, until she came upon a clearing in the forest, a small patch of open space where the moonlight penetrated fully. She felt a surge of hope that maybe the forest would open up shortly and lead her back to the main highway. Yet in the center of this clearing, she saw a tall, arched wooden sign planted crookedly into the earth. The old letters spelled out a village name she didn't recognize. Perhaps the sign had once pointed travelers in a safer direction. Now it stood half-rotted, leaning precariously, covered in patches of lichen. Her car sputtered. She realized too late that she had been pushing its battered engine to the brink. A stuttering cough rumbled under the hood, and the car lurched. She gasped, tapping the accelerator in vain. The engine died with a final cough, and the headlights dimmed, plunging her into a blanket of darkness. "No, not now," she pleaded, hands shaking as she turned the key in the ignition. The engine refused to spark. Another turn no effect? The swirling mist crept forward, as though it had been waiting for this moment, wrapping around the car in gauzy folds. She sat there for several seconds, hands clenched around the steering wheel, her breath ragged. The rustle of branches overhead mingled with the faint trickle of distant water. Everything smelled damp and decaying. The hush was so profound it weighed on her eardrums. Then, beyond the swirl of fog, she noticed two glowing orbs, the carriage lanterns her mother had glubbed with just at the edge of the clearing. The headless driver had caught up with her, waiting in watchful silence. Miriam's heart clutched in her throat. Without thinking, she scrambled for her phone. No signal, naturally. She tried the ignition again, but all she heard was a dull click. She felt trapped, like a rabbit cornered by a predator. Everything she had ever read about this ghostly driver, all the chilling horror stories people had shared at bonfires were playing out in real time. The notion of stepping out of her car was almost too terrifying to consider. Yet she had no other option if the vehicle refused to cooperate. Gathering her courage, she inched the door open, stepping onto the asphalt. The nightly chill soaked through her shoes. She told herself to remain calm, to think logically. Perhaps she could tinker with the engine or jostle a loose cable. She was no mechanic, but anything was better than waiting like a sitting duck. She popped the hood, feeling at once naked against the darkness that pressed in from all sides. Her flashlight app provided only a feeble glow, but it allowed her to see the tangle of engine parts. She shifted one cable, pulled on another, wishing she had the faintest clue what she was doing. Then she glanced up and saw the carriage, lanterns flickering with a sickly yellow flame, rolling closer with agonizing slowness. The horse's eyes still burned red, its breath creating puffs of fog in the chill night air. The driver's posture was disturbingly rigid, shoulders squared, as if surveying the stranded traveler. She couldn't see his face. There was none to see. But she felt that invisible gaze upon her. She swallowed hard. An instinctual voice in her head told her to run, but she realized there was nowhere to run. The overshadowing forest offered no comforting refuge, only a deeper darkness. A faint horse whinny made her jump, and her flashlight shook in her trembling hand. The driver's figure seemed to beckon, one gloved hand lifting in a slow, deliberate motion, as though he was inviting her into the carriage. She remembered the stories. Once you set foot inside that doomed vehicle, there was no going back. Your spirit would be bound to the driver's endless quest. She forced her gaze away, continuing to fumble with the engine. An outlandish idea surfaced. Perhaps if she gave him what he sought, a passenger, he would move on. But she was alone. Her heart pounded. She had no illusions that he'd settle for a promise or an excuse. This was an ancient specter, known for dragging poor souls to unknown fates. Even if she wanted to strike some unholy bargain, there was nothing to offer but herself. She slammed the hood closed, biting her lip in frustration and terror. The carriage was now only a few dozen paces away. The rhythmic clop of the horse's hooves slowed. The horse tossed its long, tangled mane. Miriam felt she was slipping from reality, stepping into some jagged realm of nightmares. Her mind felt blank, yet her instincts burned with the need to survive at all costs. Another thought slammed into her. The legends all warned not to look upon the driver, to ignore any invitation. They also said that if you found yourself pursued, you could attempt to replicate an old trick used by a past traveler. He had escaped by scattering certain charms or wards behind him. But she had no protective talismans. She had only her phone. In a near delirium, she wondered if reciting a prayer would help. She backed away from the carriage's approach. The ghostly horse pawed the ground, snorting plumes of mist. The driver's headless form shifted. Then the carriage door swung open, revealing an interior as black as a starless void. The air seemed to chill further, and Miriam's limbs went numb with dread. She recalled how the driver was said to lure travelers inside, only to vanish with them in a swirl of smoke. The wind hissed through the trees, stirring dead leaves across the asphalt in a macabre dance. Her eyes locked on that open doorway. She sensed the driver's silent command to step forward. Horror seized her, but something deeper still, the raw human desire to defy a terrible fate, propelled her body to action. She turned on her heel and ran. She sprinted past her broken car, leaving it behind, racing toward the far end of the clearing, where the road presumably exited. Her heart hammered, and her pulse roared in her ears. The carriage's wheels squealed in protest as the horse lunged forward. She heard the jangle of bridles, the scrape of metal-hinged wheels. Dare she look back? No. She kept her gaze forward, eyes fixed on the narrow gap beneath the overarching branches where she believed salvation lay. The forest shadows closed in around her. Fog licked at her shoes, making the ground slippery. Still, she raced on, not slowing even as she felt her lungs burn. Behind her, the phantom carriage gave chase, the driver presumably brandishing that glinting weapon. Twigs snapped underfoot. Her breath came in choking bursts. Every step felt heavier, as though the road itself was lengthening to trap her. Black shapes seemed to loom among the trees, but she refused to break her sprint. In the distance, she caught sight of a pale, wavering glow moonlight, crossing a boundary where the road left the forest. Relief surged through her. She forced her aching legs to move faster, the horrifying thunder of hooves echoing behind. With her final burst of energy, she burst through the final line of trees and found herself on a paved county road. Streetlights glowed in the distance. She whirled to face the forest boundary. Nothing emerged behind her. The silhouette of the forgotten road lay in utter darkness now. No sign of that carriage. The only movement was the slight rustling of branches in a gentle breeze. Miriam's chest heaved, her vision hazy with tears and exhaustion. She collapsed to her knees, wiping sweat from her brow, struggling to comprehend that she had escaped. It felt surreal. Part of her expected the headless silhouette to materialize from the gloom, brandishing a spectral blade and dragging her back to that cursed domain. But the minutes slipped by, and the forest held its solemn silence. If there was any sign of the ghostly driver, it remained hidden, bound to the interior gloom. She didn't feel truly safe until a passing car's headlights appeared on the distant side of the county road. Mustering what strength she had, Miriam flagged down the driver, a wide-eyed elderly man who immediately asked if she was hurt. She mumbled something about car trouble and being stranded, unable to articulate the horror she had faced. Maybe in the warmth of daylight she would try to share this tale, but tonight it felt too raw, too unbelievable. The man let her into his pickup, offering a ride to the nearest gas station. Though she was trembling and soaked in cold sweat, she managed a nod of gratitude. As they drove away from the forest, Miriam caught one last glimpse of the dark tree line in the side mirror. A thick bank of mist clung to it like a hungry specter, concealing the old road from curious eyes. The driver turned up the radio, and some gentle tune filled the cab, a stark contrast to the terrifying chase she had just endured. She leaned back against the seat, half in a daze, and silently swore she would never return to that place. Yet in the quiet recesses of her memory, she couldn't forget that final image, the open carriage door beckoning, the headless shape holding the reins. She knew that others might dare the forgotten road, lured by shortcuts or forced by circumstance, forever unaware of the danger lurking in the forest's heart. That phantom driver would continue hunting for unsuspecting passengers, each new arrival adding to the haunting silence that enveloped the deserted path. A few days later, Miriam returned with a tow truck to retrieve her abandoned vehicle. She brought a friend for company, unwilling to be alone within miles of that cursed place. They came in the early morning when the sun was at its brightest, cutting back the shadows. Even so, the air felt colder there. The atmosphere hummed with an unspoken tension. When they finally found her car, it was parked on the side of a deserted stretch of asphalt, as though none of the night's horrors had occurred. Her friend made a joke about how it must have been quite the breakdown to make her flee on foot. She didn't laugh. She only nodded and helped guide the car onto the tow truck, feeling an unshakable sense that they were being watched by eyes unseen. The forest was silent in the daylight, seemingly innocent. The battered sign was still visible in the clearing, a lonely relic. But the carriage was nowhere to be found, no hoofprints in the mud, and no evidence that its wheels had ever touched the ground. As they drove away with her vehicle in tow, Miriam felt an icy certainty that the legends were all too real. She clenched her hands together and watched the treetops fade, comforted only by the thought that she was leaving the forgotten road yet again. Still, she couldn't banish a new fear that had rooted itself in her mind. She had survived a close brush with the headless driver, and legends rarely ended so tidily. She feared that, one day, her luck might run out, perhaps on an entirely different highway in the depths of night, when the forest called once more. The eerie calm of those tall trees held secrets wrought of centuries. Cursed roads, restless spirits yearning for companionship in their endless gloom, and somewhere in that darkness the echo of hooves might resume, guided by the relentless will of the driver who needed new souls to join him on his eternal journey. Whenever night fell, heavily upon lonely roads the world over, he might appear again, the swirling clouds of mist parting for the black carriage, the blade glinting at his side, and a vacant space on the seat waiting for an unsuspecting passenger.